All right, we're back here inside the TCO studios. Pete Bercich, Gabe Henderson. Today, Pete, we're going to talk about the defensive line group. I feel like this is a group that Vikings fans are excited about, as well as offensive line, because we know there are some holes to fill, and there is a deep trench group in the defense in the NFL draft this year. And what a better way to start off than with the guy from Michigan, Quitty Payne.
Quitty Payne. I mean, this guy's just been a monster up front. Quitty Payne going to be sacked. Quitty Payne again, and Quitty Payne with that great motor.
Oh my gosh!
Right. If you could pick a guy for this as a need for this Viking team, Quitty Payne would fill that. And when you watch him on film at the University of Michigan, what's amazing is some of the techniques and some of the ways that he pass rushes is exactly how we do things here. You know, they base up over the tackle or a tight end, and then transition from really a run style to a pass rush. But he has all the speed, he has all the leverage, all the strength that you want a guy like Andre Patterson to say, come on over and let me teach you a little bit here and a little bit there, and the work ethic as well to go along with that. So, I mean, Quitty Payne would be a dream come true for Viking fans if he's there at 14, instant starter at defensive end, and now you have 4 defensive linemen that are solid all the way across the board.
So I agree with you there. But for people that are saying, well, Quitty Payne only had 6.5 sacks in 2019 and only 2 sacks last year, what's your response?
There's more to it than just sacking the quarterback, right? And you look at being at the University of Michigan, you're playing against some very good talent. But you take a look at his highlights and the things that he's done and his ability, again, to get into a good tackle, to push, to get leverage, and then be able to let that go and slip and get what we call to the back of the offensive lineman, meaning get that inside leg to the back and get past the offensive lineman. His ability to do that, guys that big and that strong don't play bent all the time. Right. He has the leverage. He can play with his knees. With his knees bent and be able to push and then, push till a lineman settles and then work his way around him on the outside, and those kinds of things. You either have those or you don't. Very, very difficult to develop. Quitty Payne has all that, so he has all the tools. I would just say, here's a guy. He didn't play football. He didn't grow up playing football, right? His story is an amazing one. How he even, got to America and is even here, and he's had the ability to play football. So you get him with an Andre Patterson. This kid has, oh my gosh, he has all the tools that you need to make him. You see what we've done with Danielle Hunter.
Right.
You have a guy with as much or not more talent to start with. That's where you begin.
Yeah, Danielle Hunter only had 4.5 sacks coming out of college, and the youngest guy to 50 sacks, still leading his 2015 class, draft class in sacks in that group. But moving along, there's a guy named Gregory Rousseau from the University of Miami that everyone is projecting to the Vikings with the 14th pick.
And with the pocket collapsing, and Rousseau gets home again. Under some pressure, great tackle brought down by Rousseau.
A tremendous athlete, very, very athletic, very, very smooth with his movements, right? You don't see necessarily the leverage and the strength and the power, which is going to be a little difficult when you're at 6'7". You're going to have to be taught to stay a little bit lower and use those long arms for leverage. Plays the run well, especially when he's on the move. But very, very good pass rusher. And again, a guy he's going to need a year or two to get in the weight room and get that man strength, right? So if you can get him in as a rookie, get him some time, learn, teach him how to play the run. I think there's going to be a lot of work with that with any of these guys, especially the Miami guys. But a lot of work on the running game. How do you use your hands? Those kinds of things. They'll, eventually become very, very good football players.
Before we get to our next guy, I'm going to have you put your GM hat on, because Gregory Rousseau is a guy, 15.5 sacks in 2019, 34.5 tackles, just outlandish stats. He opted out of the 2020 season, though, and you still got to evaluate this guy, but you don't have the same amount of film. So as a GM, how can you evaluate that?
You have to just go to the film. You have to go back to the film from a year ago and, again, see him work out. It's more important, I think, to see these guys, the guys that opted out the year before, see them on the hoof, make sure they're healthy, find out what they've been doing, because what you don't want to see is a huge weight gain. Yeah. You don't want to see this guy showing up 25, 30 pounds heavier than he was a year ago. Because is it good weight? What's going on with all that? So there's a whole lot more question marks, which could result in someone slipping a little bit further down the draft board.
And I think that, that's a lot to weigh out, especially with that 14th pick, because before we signed Dalvin Tomlinson, a lot of experts were picking Christian Barmore from University of Alabama to be selected with the 14th pick.
Christian Barmore came in and busted things up.
Barmore's having a big night.
Right on cue, that man again. Christian Barmore with the tackle for loss. What a play.
It's big time play. 310 pounds moving like that.
I was reading, he's 6'5", 310 pounds, and ran a 4.93 at his pro day.
Yeah, he's a beast inside, right? You look at interior defensive linemen, and the trend there is just you're seeing more and more guys that are in that 6'2", 6'3" type range, right? So he's just a monster. He's a space eater. He's going to have to learn, I think, to play with a little bit lower pad level. The swim move and those kinds of things. There's a place for it, but you can't do that all the time in the NFL. But you draft, you pay for size and speed, right? When you have a guy that big that can run that well and carry that much weight and be able to hold off an offensive lineman, that's people pay a lot of money for that. But a very, very, unbelievably good football player. Would we want him? Would you want him if he's there staring in your face? Absolutely. He's going to be, an outstanding football player. The question is when you're at 14, you have a lot of other needs in other positions, I think, that are gonna supersede that.
Another guy who may not get drafted on day one, but it brings a lot of value to a team is Jason Olah from Penn State.
Thrown down by Jason Olah.
What stands out to you about his film?
He's a little smaller, right?
Okay.
He's kind of almost an outside linebacker type size guy. But you remember Gross Matos from a year ago. This kid is a freak physically, right? He has all the athletic skills, and I think he's very, very raw. Meaning from a technique standpoint, there's so much that he can be taught. The question then is going to be how much do you pay for this kid's athleticism and how much you pay for his potential. But again, you get him in a system like ours with working with a guy like Andre Patterson. Oh my gosh, I think this kid can be an unbelievable asset, an unbelievable outside type pass rusher. He does a good job against the run, a little hesitant sometimes, but you can work with that. I don't think there's any lack of aggressiveness, but when he opens it up and lets it go, my goodness, this kid is dynamic. I mean, he's unbelievable.
There's a guy named Jordan Smith. He went to UAB. Yeah. You're really high on him. He dominated in the East-West Shrine Bowl practices.
Deflected and intercepted. Jordan Smith.
Why are you so high on him?
Well, he kind of looks like a power forward in football gear, right? He's 6'6", almost 6'7". But you watch the film on this kid. He has the best get off that I've seen in a very, very long time. But by that, I mean he's able to beat linemen just getting off on the snap of the football, kind of like Thomas did with the Chiefs for so many years. That's a unique ability, right? That's something that defensive linemen and that group you work on it every day. When the ball moves, you move. This kid has a freakish ability to get off the football, which means he's going to beat some offensive tackles right off the football. You're going to have fans back in the stands, right? So in these home games, he's going to have an unbelievable advantage. He's going to need that early on because of the lack of strength that he has. He needs to put on some weight and on the lack of experience and technique. However, we saw some of those examples down at the Senior Bowl where he's just destroying guys off the line of scrimmage, and he's athletic enough to get low or to get around and to drop his hips and get his leg through and get underneath and get to the back of the lineman. So as a project, right, you say, I would love for the Vikings to not take a risk per se, but at some point in the draft, you invest in a guy like this. Because again, I think you get him with Andre Patterson. You get him in that room with that group, with the Danielle Hunter. I think he is going to be a good pressure pass rusher from day one just because of that, especially at these home games.
You talked about not having fans. Vikings fans, we miss you. Looking forward to having you back in 2021. But last but not least, you wanted us to add a bonus guy to this list. And his name is Cameron Sample, defensive tackle from Tulane. If you go on YouTube and type in his highlight tape, they said he's the most underrated defensive lineman in this draft.
That and size may have something to do with that, but nowadays you sit down on YouTube and watch the Senior Bowl one-on-ones, and then you're just going through it and watching, and you're like, ooh, that was a nice play. And you come back and you're like, what's that on his helmet? Where's that kid from? And you start doing some research on him. Yeah. As an interior pass rushing defensive lineman, I think this kid is very dynamic. Right? He's very, very good, very, very quick, great pad level, power, leverage, all these things that, again, can be hard to teach, but he just carries them naturally. So whatever is keeping him off of being on, the top of the big board, whether it's size or whatever else that may be, you watch the film, this kid, it translates, and you just need to get a guy like him into camp. Get working with him. I think he's going to be a good football player.
Yeah, Pete, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of the NFL Draft Prospect Profile.